the Rules live stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and we are here live with the Chad Haag champion returning, and the great and powerful Noah Smith, writer at noopinion.blog, formerly of Bloomberg, and you write a lot about technology, science, politics, all kinds of good stuff, and I am very fortunate to have these two incredibly smart individuals here. No other program does this except for Break the Rules. We are crossing the barriers to bring you these kind of people that otherwise I don't think would never be speaking to each other, but here we are. We have a tech optimist, which is Noah, Chad Haag, how would you describe yourself, Chad, when it comes to tech? Real quick.
Well, I consider myself a tech realist, but this is anti-tech thought as represented by Ted Kaczynski, Jacques Ellul, figures like that.
Gotcha.
So, do I have to check my mail carefully here?
What would you say, Chad? Does he have to check his mail carefully?
Yeah. No, I'll just...
I'll
throw every package down the stairs before I open it.
If it's from India, just leave it in the backyard, all right? Or give it to, like, somebody you hate then. But anyway, before we get right down to it, I want to say to everybody who is watching, be sure to smash that subscribe button, smash the like button, all that good stuff. So anyway, levslens.com, by the way, my Substack. Be sure to join the Substack. It's really, really good, as well as Noah's Substack, as well as Chad's Patreon. Anyway, guys, let us start with Noah. Noah, you've been very optimistic about tech. You've been a silver lining in the doom and gloom that a lot of people are experiencing today. So what would you attribute to your optimism despite the things that are going on when it comes to the future, specifically when it comes to technology?
Well, okay, I'll give you two examples here. Number one was the pandemic. Now, I, like almost everybody else in the world, sat around for about a year and a half and watched people scream about the pandemic, scream to have lockdowns, scream to wear masks, or scream that the pandemic isn't really a danger and you should just go outside and, whatever, it's just a cold. And I watched all these people just scream and scream and scream and scream. And then what eventually happened? How did that eventually end? Well, we made a vaccine. And the vaccine, I got the vaccine. It was great. Some people didn't get the vaccine. They had higher death rates. Fine, whatever, you do you. But I did. And I've actually never gotten COVID. But yeah, so vaccines saved a lot of people. Pandemic kind of went away. I mean, COVID, some people still get COVID, but it's just not nearly as deadly as it used to be. And that was great. Science and technology sort of saved us when mass action did not. When all the screaming that people did, which was supposed to motivate mass action, it didn't have no effect, but its effect was ultimately much less than technology, including in China, where mass action actually did something. I mean, zero COVID in China they did zero COVID, and it was effective for a while, and then it broke down, and then that failed. But so I was incredibly heartened by the ability of technology to rapidly address a problem. I can't say it solved it, because some people still died of COVID. Some people even after getting vaccinated. But so I won't say solved, but in terms of massively address the problem better than really anything else. And that technology, mRNA vaccine, was developed by a combination of government funding and private capital over many years, with a lot of very sort of dedicated, hardworking scientists kind of working against the grain and believing in this long-term vision. And then it broke onto the scene at exactly the right time. We approved vaccines in record time. It saved, by our best estimates, millions of lives. That was incredibly heartening. And now that same mRNA technology, which proved itself during COVID, is being used to create vaccines to various cancers. You could get vaccines for cancer. How cool is that? And then malaria, which is the most, by many estimates, the most deadly chronic disease in the world, kills hundreds of thousands of people, mostly kids in Africa, per year. And now we have vaccines that are going to cut down on that incredibly. And we're rolling them out right now, just a couple of years after the pandemic. Wow, that's so cool. Technology, man. Eat that, malaria. And then, so then the second example is climate change. And I've been sounding the alarm about climate change, worried about climate change since I was a kid in the 90s. Since I watched An Inconvenient Truth, just like everybody else. I saw the Kyoto protocols and the Paris agreement, and I watched all that, and I was like, oh God, like nobody's ever going to do anything about this. And to some degree, I was right, because measures to dramatically curb economic growth, to curb consumption and all that stuff never materialized, never happened. No one ever took them seriously. However, even in Europe, right? And then, however, then all this time, scientists and engineers were working on solar power and batteries. And then solar power and batteries suddenly got amazingly cheap with 90% cost reductions each decade. And so solar and batteries, I can't say this has solved climate change, but finally it looks like we have a lot of hope that we didn't have if solving climate change would have required mass social action to cut back on consumption, cut back on growth, and sort of re-impoverish ourselves the way that many people said in the early 2000s that it would. And I pessimistically believed that it might. Instead, somehow a technological solution presented itself. I can't say the problem is solved, but it's the game has changed. The constraints have been relaxed, and suddenly we have hope. We have a chance against this epochal threat of climate change. And so those two episodes have made me just so optimistic, and they sort of technology pilled me. I always thought technology was cool. I was interested in it, but my view is much more ambivalent before those two episodes. And now I've really become a lot more techno optimist in the last 3 years.
Now, before you reply, I hope that you will reply to the second one before replying to the first one, because God help me, Chad, if my channel gets destroyed for this, for whatever reply you would make regarding number one. So right now, let's focus on number two, and then maybe we could think of a way of addressing number one using, let's say, terms that are not going to trigger the algorithm. Because as you know, Noah, that's the other part about living in our technological age today. When people say certain things in combination with other things, it may not work so well for YouTube. But anyway, Chad, let's talk.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
What can we not say? Wait,
Well,
we can't say it. You can't tell me what not to say, because then you have to say it. You have to hold up a little.
Exactly.
What are we not allowed to say?
So, before we get to what we are not allowed to say, yes, absolutely.
Tell me what we're not allowed to say, because I don't want to destroy your show. You seem like a nice person. I really like streamers as a group in general. And anyway, yeah, let me know what I'm not.
I appreciate it, but Chad, let's go for the solar panel thing, because I recall you were talking about solar panels quite a bit in your various lectures. So yeah, go for it.
To be honest with you, I think both the first point and the second point basically fall under the same problem from an anti-tech perspective, which is there's something of a distinction between the way that humans perceive technological changes and the way that technology itself, if you could say, perceives it, although we can't really speak of anything like consciousness or volition in the classical humanness sense when it comes to technology. But there's still a distinction between the way changes appear to humans and the reasons why it is implemented by technology on a raw Darwinist level. Certain things are naturally selected for because they're beneficial in the sense of increasing technology's control of the factors within its environment, increasing the predictability of those factors, how they are going to behave, and increasing the overall efficiency and productivity of the system. And those factors determine whether certain things will be naturally selected for or against. And because we put it in those sort of neutral terms, in which we're not considering the morality or the ethical goodness of certain things, like, say, stopping climate change. Obviously, preventing climatological catastrophes is a good thing. Even from a deep ecology perspective, preventing fossil fuel pollution is a good thing. But that's not the reason why climate change restrictions regarding, say, clean energy, so-called clean energy sources like solar panels or the electric vehicles, that's not the reason why those are naturally selected for. From the standpoint of technology, the point is not to save human lives, which of course, takes us to the first point. Also, the question is whether these restrictions will increase the productivity, predictability, efficiency, and control of the system as a whole. And you'll find that the kind of solutions to climate change which are favored are always ones that involve more technologies rather than doing things as simple as simply scaling back one's level of consumption. You could do a lot in the United States, for example, by simply reducing the amount of fossil fuels, because the average American uses 3 times more fossil fuels than the average European for a lower standard of living. So there's a lot of room there to cut on waste, but you don't find proposals of that kind, scaling back for even something as simple as not using drying machines in the summertime. You could save a lot of energy by leaving your laundry out to dry in the sun, as I do. Drying machines, rather, don't exist within India because there's not a need for it. It's already so hot outside. Your clothes will dry much faster without any electricity being wasted to do so if you put it in the sun. But that's not even an option for many people in America. There are some states where it's illegal statewide to do something as basic as hang your laundry out to dry. So we have options which could do a lot to reduce fossil fuel-based pollution, but they're never selected for because they don't increase the sort of things which technology is interested in. If you have electric vehicles, though, those are going to be selected for whether or not they actually do anything to cut back on the things we're trying to get rid of. There's a lot of pollution associated with the production of these batteries. Oh, and by the way, solar panels don't actually produce, some would argue, as much surplus energy as they're marketed to. They're more like, according to people like John Michael Greer, storages of fossil fuel energy that has already been extracted from those sources. The number of years a solar panel would require to fully pay back all of the energy that went into producing it, when you consider the system as a whole, according to, I think, Hermetic's Metanomad, it's 100 years, as he mentioned one time on his podcast. And regardless of the empirical question of how many years it takes for a solar panel to make back its investment, I think the philosophical question of why exactly it is that those solutions are implemented, whereas other options we have, which would work just as well and actually would cost us nothing, like putting your laundry out to dry in the sun, are not only not favored, they're not encouraged, but they're actually made illegal. And really the same thing, to bring this back to the first point, you can find with the response to the pandemic. The only solution which was favored by the technological system was a solution that increased its control of the system for its own sake. Now, it could cite incidentally trying to save lives, but that wasn't really the motivation. The motivation for having a system in place in which, quite frankly, you had to show on your smartphone a little barcode just to enter a restaurant, right? Even to the point that there was a report in Switzerland. Some people were a restaurant was allowing people into their business
You're talking
without
about vaccination
bothering to check whether they had that.
standards?
It was reported that
The barcode is for whether you've been
I'm trying
vaccinated?
to avoid certain terms.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm trying to avoid
Vaccination, I
certain
said it already.
terms.
This is
but,
how
we
no.
can-
This is
I
how
can understand that.
Yeah, this is how
Yeah, no,
paranoid I've gotten
the
with.
barcode was to show you've been vaccinated, right?
Yeah, but this is how paranoid,
I
just so you
used a
understand,
photo.
Noah, how paranoid YouTubers have gotten over this, because this is how censorious things are on YouTube. Because the algorithm, if it detects certain terms used a lot, it may detect certain negative terms that are not that far away.
Oh, I
all of us,
see.
you see what I mean,
The,
right?
the algorithm is going to think we're like, Alex
Yes.
Berenson or somebody, and then...
Well, to be honest with you, I've had the misinformation tag put on some of my videos. Ted Kaczynski over using the word climate change, as I've already done here. The algorithm could check whether that's been mentioned, and you could have a little, disclaimer.
Bro,
for
you already
viewing
said
what
you
climate
support
change really is.
you support Ted Kaczynski, so it's going to tag you. I think we're tagged. It's like dangerous anti-tech terrorists here. All right. I see. But okay, so then, but I remember that I didn't use a barcode. I used a photo of a little vaccine card to get into restaurants.
There
Or
were
like
little cards as well.
In like a Japantown Mall here in SF, all the restaurants required you to do that. Yeah, you could only get in if you had like proof of vaccination status.
But no, as far as what Chad was talking about right now, any thoughts when it comes to this technology being much more important for its own growth, rather for anything having to do with the specific problems that people are out there to solve?
Well, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right when you talk about these technological solutions being preferred to what you might call social solutions. Is that a good name for the alternatives? Like, everybody hang your clothes out to dry or whatever.
Well, the
Like,
question
is social
from technology
solutions a good name for the alternative? Like, what can we call those alternatives?
The only question from technology standpoint, as basically being unconcerned with human morality, is simply whether the technology is more advanced or less advanced. You could argue that hanging your clothes out to dry is technological in the sense that, yes, that is something that humans do not do purely instinctually. From the standpoint of Elul, even using stone tools is technology in the sense that you're deviating away from purely animal instinct to use reason to find an efficient method to do something. But that's the whole point, is there's a plurality of technologies, some of them dating very far back into the past, other ones just introduced recently. And from technology standpoint, it's only understood in those terms. Something that is more recent has to be implemented, and something that is quote unquote obsolete has to be actually outlawed, because that is a condition for technology as a whole to continue advancing in the areas of increasing control, predictability, efficiency, and those sort of factors.
You're saying that people want more control, predictability, and efficiency.
Not people. Technology wants those things. And
What does that mean?
at best, technology as a self-propagating system, as described by Ted Kaczynski in Anti-Tech Revolution, Why and How, technology as just one more
You could just say Kevin Kelly. He says the same thing and didn't blow anybody up. He's just a jolly old photographer.
The empirical question of whether Ted Kaczynski committed crimes allegedly or not, I think, can be set aside from his insights of a purely rational nature regarding the characteristics of self-propagating systems as really not being unique to modern technology. He noted that, as a mathematician by training, he noted that you can establish certain axioms for the behavior of all systems that seek to expand themselves. This
isn't an axiom just an assumption? An axiom is an assumption. Like,
if you look at
you've done math, right?
Euclidean geometry, an axiom is a truth that does not have to be proved before this allows you to escape. From ancient Greek perspective,
right.
The problems of
Euclidean geometry, that's all math, man.
Right.
All math has axiom.
Right. It allows you to escape the problems of infinite regression on one hand and circular reasoning on the other. And this is something which Kaczynski actually adopts in a non-mathematical context to describe the behavior of all systems that seek to expand themselves. This incidentally and empirically overlaps with modern technology, but it's not unique to it. Even viruses. Viruses exhibit the same behavior despite not even being alive. And of course, we were just talking about what happened in 2021. Our efforts to compete with a virus for much of 2020 turned out to be much more difficult than expected because they exhibit the same sort of tendency towards seeking to expand their power as a self-propagating system, despite the fact that there's literally no appeal to volition or consciousness in the human sense of the term, because they're literally not alive. And between those 2 points... Mm-hmm.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Between those 2 points of the continuum, you can also find, I'll just say very quickly, all of the human examples, even in the absence of modern technology. Roman Empire in the ancient world was also a self-propagating system that did everything it could to expand itself despite lacking modern technology.
I mean, they had some technology. They had the Corvus to grab those Carthaginian ships. They had some Roman concrete, which is pretty good. They had some stuff. But anyway...
But what do you think of Chad's overall thesis here when it comes to this viral-like spread of technology?
Well, okay. I mean, I think that if you look at evolution and selection pressure in the natural world, you can kind of see how it works. You don't just have to. I mean, like Charles Darwin just said, okay, there's some sort of pressure, but even him, he said there's survival of the fittest, right? If you don't have the right shaped beak, you die, or you don't get as much food. It wasn't teleological. You could actually say something about the process that evolution used to push, that natural selection uses, right? You could say, and basically, if you don't get food, you die. If you don't reproduce, you die. Things like that. And so they didn't just say, okay, the things that are fittest are the ones that reproduce more, and the ones that reproduce more are the things that are fittest. That's not a theory. That's just a relabeling. And so the thing about evolution is to be a useful theory. We have to be able to go into the sort of particulars and look at, sort of open the hood, as we used to say. You could still do that. And then look at how it works, inside. And I think that with biological evolution, we have thousands upon thousands of very smart researchers, very well-funded researchers engaged in doing that. In terms of technological evolution or social evolution more generally, I think that there is promise to this idea that we can look at how societies evolve, how technologies themselves evolve, or how an overall sort of group of technologies, a technium, to use Kevin Kelly's phrase, evolves over time. I think there is promise to that, but we've got to be able to look at well, how does that work? What are the processes by which the technology evolves? And I think that for natural evolution, the processes are like food, death, sex, pretty simple stuff. For technologies, the question is, okay, what makes this one technology? What are the events that happen to mean that this one technology wins, this other technology loses? Like, what are the micro of this macro? You know what I mean? And so when you said it's not people who adopt the technologies, it's evolution, basically. I think what the mechanisms of evolution do involve people. People are involved in that mechanism of evolution, just as food and sex and death are involved in the mechanisms of life evolution. And so when I look at how certain technologies get adopted and others fail, for example, the Zeppelin, right? We invented this flying machine, and you could actually use it. It could fly like Zeppelins fly. You can even drop bombs a little bit. But then, and we invented airplanes too. And then originally, a lot of Germans thought Zeppelins were the future, and then French people thought airplanes were the future, and the French people were right, and the Germans were wrong. And why did that happen? Well, I think that in order to know why Zeppelins prevailed, why airplanes prevailed over Zeppelins, I think we just have to look at the characteristics of the technology, why they were selected, the characteristics of the human, corporations and consumers, and militaries, et cetera, that were, that chose to adopt one or the other. And I think if you look at that detailed history, we have a pretty good idea of what happened. But people are really the story here. People in terms of militaries that realized airplanes were much better for fast bombing of things. Consumers that realized that airplanes could get them where they wanted to go much faster. Things like that. I could go on. The point is that people weren't part of the mechanism. So in other words, when we say that people chose technologies or that evolution chose technologies, it's not really saying a different thing, because the actions of people are the micro foundations, if you will, to borrow an economics term, of the macro effect of evolution. They're the little pieces. The people are the pieces of the evolution.
Before Chad replies, I just want to say real quick that in your wonderful article, you said that I believe my species has the right to choose. And from what I got reading a lot of Chad's work, Chad's problem has to do with technology as it's going right now, getting rid of that right to choose for the individual. I don't want to put words in Chad's mouth, but let me know what you think, Chad.
Before you do that, I want to say one thing, which is I just looked it up, and the right to dry laws have been implemented across America. You are now allowed to hang your clothing.
Anywhere within America.
I believe so. Yes, I think there were some court decisions. Clothesline bans void in 19 states. I think
one of the reasons for this,
but
one of the reasons I suspect, if I may say so, is this probably has something to do with property values, because just like you have to mow your lawn, you have to waste 40% of the water in the average American city goes to green lawns, simply because your neighbors want their property values to not be dropped by one guy on the block who seems to be too poor to have a green lawn, or too poor to afford a drying machine. That's really what I think lies behind this, at least from a pathological human perspective is if there's somebody on the block hanging out their clothes to dry, that signals more quote unquote poverty within this neighborhood than the neighbors are comfortable with.
Interesting. But anyway, back to the question at hand, Chad. What do you think about what Noah was talking about regarding evolution and the individual's ability to choose versus technology kind of swallowing that entire thing over?
Well, choice is a really important theme within Jacques Ellul's work because as you get in modern technology, choice becomes more and more an illusion. We talked
Wait,
earlier
whose
about
work?
this.
Whose work? You said that really quickly.
Jacques Ellul.
Jacques Ellul.
Jacques Ellul, the Technological Society, he talks in the second chapter about how choice is kind of a humanistic illusion. You have, once again, this contrast between the way that humans perceive technological change within human consciousness, with all of the pathological instincts that remain from our long evolutionary history, and the influences of things like philosophy and religion and all these other sort of biases which lead us to misperceive technological changes in comparison with the way that technology itself, you could say, perceives, but really there's nothing like consciousness here. It's just the raw mechanism of Darwinist natural selection. The difference between the two really is that when humans perceive that there is something like an opportunity for technological choice on their part, like the question of whether they want to use a drying machine or whether they want to hang their clothes out to dry in the sun, they misjudge the situation by thinking that they have any need or even any ability to exercise thinking to make a decision about which one of those two could be implemented. From technology's standpoint, that's an illusion because insofar as there seems to be a plurality of different technological options, what that is in reality is simply a linear trajectory in which the obsolete technology is simply a less up-to-date version of the thing that replaced it. And because you have, with, say, smartphones and landline phones as a particularly vivid example of this, it might seem that there's two different technologies here, the landline phone and the smartphone. But what that really is just a linear trajectory in which we used landline phones when that was the best option available before the technology had been worked out for the smartphone. But now that the smartphone has arrived, there might be a few people out there who still, like myself, live without one. I use a $20 Nokia non-smartphone. It basically just makes calls, sends text messages, and has an alarm clock, things like that. There might still be the illusion that there's a choice. There might still be a few people violating this mandate. But from technology's standpoint, the question of whether a newer technology or an older technology should be used is a priori, as Jacques Ellul puts it. Just as within mathematics, the question of whether 4 is a larger number than 3 is something which a human could spend time trying to work out with their mind, crunching the numbers, even just for a very, very basic example. But there's no need for them to do that because 4 is already larger than 3 on an a priori level. And it's like that with technologies also.
Well, so if new technologies always replace old ones, and we just assume that, I have trouble calling that an axiom because axioms are something that you assume a priori. But when I look at the facts of the world, I see that new technologies don't always replace old ones. There are many new technologies that are not adopted by anybody. They just go in the ash heap of history. And so I'm like, well, was that also axiomatic? And at that point, are we just applying a word to things? Because, when I look, there's plenty of new technologies, many of them from Japan, actually. There's so many Ig Nobel technologies that are just goofy stuff. No, it doesn't get adopted, doesn't get used. And so if we say that newer technologies get replaced newer technologies replace older technologies a priori, are we saying anything other than just the simple observation that technologies that replace older ones are technologies that replace older ones? And simply, that's just saying A equals A, right? Because obviously if a technology replaces another, then it replaced it. And then it's newer, but then some technologies are invented that never see the light of day, that no one ever uses, or that like Zeppelins were new, right? they never really came into wide use. They were used a little bit, some people tried to use them and then eventually tossed them. And so there was a reason why they people invented a new thing, but it didn't really get used. There's millions and millions and millions. Electron beam lithography, that was new, but nobody uses it to make a semiconductor. And so the question, comes back to, why do some technologies get used and others don't? I don't think there's one simple answer to that question. And I certainly don't think it's individual. The answer is individual choice. People just have like this menu and they go, boop, I select that one. And then whoever selects them, gets selected by the most boop buttons, then that's the one that wins. I don't think that. And in my article, I wrote that the process of choice is a collective one, usually not an individual one. But I think that still, despite the fact that it's not just this idealized sort of like menu selection of individuals, there are mechanisms that we can sort of identify of why the choices get made, and the stuff you're talking about like HOAs telling you what you can and can't do with your property. That's obviously a collective mechanism. Some people get together and make a HOA and tell you what you can and can't do technologically. Right. And they restrict lots of technologies and they allow and they mandate other technologies. And those people make a collective choice. I hate HOAs, by the way. I think they're safe. But they should just they should be illegal. Anyway, but even making HOAs illegal would be a collective choice of the government that banned them. And so I think that there's a lot we can understand about why some technologies get chosen, others don't. I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say that I think society always makes the right decision, because obviously sometimes we make the wrong decision, right? Like we ban things that oughtn't to be banned, and sometimes we allow things that oughtn't to be allowed, right? Like high-waisted jeans. I mean, come on, ban that. Anyway, so just kidding, millennials. Anyway, but I guess my point is that a theory of evolution of technology can't be teleological. We have to say something about why this one is chosen instead of the other one. It can't be, it's not axiomatic to simply observe that some things happen and others don't. That's not an axiom. That's just an observation.
Chad, before your response, we also got a super chat, and we are going to be doing super chats towards the end, everybody. I appreciate the super chats. Keep needing those super chats. Chad, take it away.
Wait. What did you just say?
What?
Hold on. Sorry,
What?
Lev, what was a super chat?
Yeah, we got super chats on this stream.
Wait, explain what that is. How does that work?
Okay, so in the YouTube world, when people really care about the program that they're watching, they can donate money in the form of a question, and they could ask us questions and get a response from us. And this is a good way to...
Can I say like, yes, yes, yes? Ice cream so good. Yes, yes, yes.
Absolutely, you can, and I think that's gonna bring all the people to drop those likes and click the bells and all that good stuff, because people are wired now with that TikTok mentality. But Noah, you need to have bunny ears. I know you're a fan of bunny rabbits, so the next step for you is gonna be to have bunny ears and the nose and like the whiskers, and then you could just like go all out and become like the next hot e-girl. But before we get to that, once again, everybody, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Peanut butter, yum, whatever. Okay, Chad, go for it.
So this actually, I think, takes us back to something mentioned earlier about how the natural selection doesn't happen in accord with some absolute value in the abstract, even, say, expanding control. You mentioned earlier that in the real world, natural selection is kind of ecologically dependent. It depends on the context in which it is taking place, what sort of things will be selected for. For wild animals, those include things, as you mentioned, like food and sexual reproduction and avoiding death, etc. And I think that's exactly the point that Jacques Ellul also made in the Technological Society, that natural selection, even for modern technology, is ecologically sensitive, in the sense that the context itself is what technology has to change so that the sort of things which worked on a purely natural level for wild animals come to be replaced one by one by other things which make no presupposition of something as basic as life. And you can find this with the decision of Amazon recently to hire 750,000 robots, which is about half its a workforce at 1.5 million is its total. So it's effectively hired what might seem at first to be half of its workforce, until you realize that one robot is not simply equal to one human worker. The reason they were brought in was precisely that the sort of natural instincts which would be beneficial in the wild are completely absent in these robots. They don't have to take breaks to do something as basic as sleep. They can work 24 hours a day. This is the warning that Andrew Yang also put out about self-driving trucks, is that, you know, a truck can drive 24 hours a day. It doesn't have to stop at the truck stop overnight to get just enough sleep to make the order the next day. So there's no competition if they were to actually fully work out self-driving trucks, which apparently his prediction of 3 years turned out to be false, because it's been over 4 years since he appeared on Joe Rogan with that prediction. But at any rate, in the hypothetical, the competition between a robot that needs no sleep, needs no food, and from an economic standpoint, this means they don't ask for pay raises. One of the big problems this year in America is that you have a record number of strikes going on, right? Because inflation necessitates that these workers need more money for housing, for food, and things. Energy costs are always going up. Well, robots don't have that problem. They don't have to take out mortgages for houses, which are constantly going up due to raising the interest rates, and also the property inflation generally. And many metro areas now in America, it's like $1 million for a house on it. You just take for granted that that's normal or average. Well, robots don't have that problem. They don't ask for pay raises. They don't take breaks. They don't need to eat. They don't have any interest in sexual reproduction, because the reproduction of machines is handled by industrial production itself rather than them. So that means they're not distracted, because the reason why this was also mentioned by Amazon, or rather people commenting on it, the reason why these robots are being selected for is also that they don't get distracted by things like their smartphones, but also just generally new things happening in their environment, despite the fact that our distractibility is a hardwired instinct, because in the wild, you have to notice new things appearing in your environment, because they could be as dangerous as threats that could kill you. But there's also positive things. If you observe the behavior of feral cats, which we have a lot of here in India, male tomcats will notice if there's a new female cat in the neighborhood, because they have to be on the alert for things like that for reproduction. Well, that's an instinct which lingers up to human nature, but is absent for these robots. So we have a strange situation in which the things that would have been crucial for survival in a natural context have been eliminated, precisely because the context itself has changed to one that is as unnaturalized as possible.
Interesting. Noah, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, that all sounds about right, but I'm just trying to figure out how that fits into the earlier discussion.
Well, we were talking about how technology is something that is not going to be, at least from Chad's perspective, beneficial to the choices, whether it's collective choice or personal choice that a human would make. And from what I'm understanding, Chad, your reasoning with these robots not reacting to certain natural cues, that's one of the things that's going to end up trapping people eventually. Would that be right, or am I misreading what you're saying, Chad?
In the short term, humans will have to also make themselves more and more robotic in order to sort of compete. But the really skeptical view of this is that in the long term, the competition won't be possible anymore. And at a certain point, the robots are going to supplant humans in the same way that we put other hominid species out of work. Now, we have to be careful with that claim. We tend to think of Homo sapiens interaction with Neanderthals as we restage it in Hollywood as it was a violent war of the two struggling for supremacy. But it was more simple than that. I mean, from a Darwinist perspective, it was just that we put them out of work. We became better at doing the same sort of thing as they had been doing. And at that point, they just disappeared. And something like that could happen with humans. But we can't rule out the possibility that one day the
still have Neanderthal gene.
Right, they were kind of absorbed into humans, but I mean, with other hominids that were evolutionary dead ends, other hominids simply disappeared because they just weren't as good at doing the survival thing as we were. And there will reach a point where we're not as good either as robots are.
That may be true, if AI becomes autonomous, and robots have autonomous AI, and all robots require resources. You got to have those GPUs, electricity, and all these resources. They'll compete with us, And maybe they'll be like, okay, these organics are taking our resources. We're just going to clean them out like vermin. And then the robots rise up and kill us all. And like, maybe. Like, I've seen that movie. I've seen several of that movie.
But we don't necessarily have to go
maybe.
that much in the future in order to figure out what's going on right now. So, if we just focus on what's going on in the present situation, where do you see the real problem with what technology is already turning us into, if anything?
Well, there's a huge number of problems with what technology is turning us into. But the biggest problem, I think, is that it is negating all of our natural instincts that we inherited from our evolutionary history, even while seeming in the short term to be allowing them unbridled freedom, even more than previous ages. And it's also negating all of the philosophical ideas that have existed throughout history in order to make us people incapable of thinking. If we return to that first point real quick, negating our natural instincts, even while seeming to allow us unbridled freedom to use them. You look at something like food. The tendency for hunter-gatherers to have a very strong reaction to certain tastes, like sweetness or like fattiness or saltiness. That was because those were extremely rare within nature. You might find a bush that's particularly sweet by natural standards, but you'll never find anything like soda pop, right? So we're hardwired to react very strongly, to pay attention, right? This is our distractibility when we encounter those things, because within nature, it would be beneficial to even binge on them. There's something of a binge mechanism which we have in place, the same way that wolves will eat a lot of meat from something they kill, because it may be a while before they have another successful kill for prey, which are difficult, admittedly, to kill. But for humans in modern technological context, these instincts are kind of thwarted away from their original aim and just lead to the paradoxical situation in which you have people who are binging on more calories than ever had been the case in history, but are still malnourished because the food itself has changed into something which is no longer even really food at this point. There was an experiment done by the last remaining McDonald's in the nation of Iceland in the Great Recession of 2008. They had to shut down the last remaining McDonald's. And as an experiment, this franchise decided to take the last Big Mac fries meal ever served and put it into a museum to observe what actually happened to it. Well, 10 years later, it still looked pretty much the same as it had when it was served.
Yummy. Very interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that bad food sucks. But, if you look around the world, there's far fewer people die of malnourishment than they used to. Very few people around the world die of malnourishment now relative to population. It's pretty small. People used to die of malnutrition all the time. And you look at even our grandparents, you've met your grandparents. I've met my grandparents, to say nothing of our great grandparents. They look worse. They look worse. And the reason is just because they had higher disease loads. They didn't get as good nutrition. People have looked better and better over time, just healthier and healthier. And not always, not all people, right? Because you have obesity. Yeah, and you have, and sometimes you have drug epidemics that also make people look a lot worse, like fentanyl or whatever. But overall, people just look a hell of a lot healthier in the world now than they did back in the World War II generation. They're taller, stronger. And then if you look around the world, especially in India, like Indian people are just doing so much better materially in terms of getting access to food than they did even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and all that stuff. I think, obviously, I can't, I'm not like a Panglossian who just says, oh, everything always works out for the best, because it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't work out for the best. But then I think that overall, so far, it's worked out for the best in most areas. I think, back in 2016, I was at an Airbnb and I had bed bugs. Have you ever had bed bugs, either of you guys?
No.
You've never had bed bugs. Well, you are among the lucky people of Earth. You are among the luckiest people who've ever lived to not have had bed bugs. Back in the 1800s, when humanity was already technologically far above our sort of, ape progenitors, back in the 1800s, everybody had bed bugs. People in Congress had bed bugs, and someone was writing and complaining that they saw bed bugs crawling around the collar of some congressman or something. You had to burn your mattress all the time, and that wouldn't get rid of the bed bugs. They just come back. And if you ever had bed bugs, you realize they leave little red dots all over your skin, which are one of many, many, many reasons why the people in the old days, even the rich people, had red dots all over their skin. Bed bugs are insanely hard to get rid of. And if you have them now, you will get PTSD from them. And that is how bad they are. That is how difficult they are to get rid of. However, we have far fewer bed bugs than we used to because we have a lot of technologies that now control them. So bed bugs have become a rare disaster instead of a just constant thing that degrades everybody's quality of life. Maybe it was bed bugs that made me a techno-optimist, because the bed bug experience is so terrible. Anyone watching this stream will know, who's had bed bugs will know exactly what I'm talking about. And anyone who hasn't should Google what it's like and all the testimonials of having bed bugs. Because there are some things that I think our ancestors had better than us, but mostly it's just shit like that. It's stuff where I can say shit. I can curse on this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. After the first 15 minutes, shit is fine.
All right, shit. Well, then just all that shit. Like we have it so much better. I have no desire to go back to the past on almost anything. There's like a few things where I think, okay, well, this was a mistake. We should reverse this. We should go back. We've got to return. If you've seen that with
with the V instead of exactly.
Return.
Actually, it's funny, by the way, that you're saying this right now, because it matches up. I wanted to save this to the end, but the super chat that we got from Neuroda for $9.99 kind of gets to what you're saying here and asks you a follow-up question regarding it. So Noah, what, spelled by the way W-A-T, but anyway, Noah, what is your response to rising suicide rates, SSRI prescriptions, anxiolytic usage, decreasing fertility, decreased metabolic rate, increased obesity? Seems conflicting.
All right. Well, I don't know what a couple of those things were, but I do think that I wrote a post called "Honestly, It's Probably the Phones," in which I basically endorsed the conclusion that a lot of the emotional problems that we're seeing among the youth are a result of smartphone usage coupled with social media. The nexus of smartphones on their own might not do it if you didn't have social media with the smartphones, and social media itself might not do it because if you only checked it a few times a day when you're at your laptop. But together, ubiquitous, a thing. I want to make my hair as weird as possible here so I can be like a mad scientist. Having this social media connector in your phone all the time, I think is probably largely bad for you emotionally. And I think that we haven't, as a society, developed mechanisms to handle that to our benefit. And I think it's degrading our health. I think you've seen this with technology again and again. You've seen misuse of technology. I won't say overuse, because really it's just a misuse, but a misuse of technology leading to declines in population health in certain dimensions. You had, in Britain, industrial smog and stuff like that really just caused a dramatic crash in population health for decades and decades. And Orwell was writing about it in the Road to Wagon Pier, if you ever read that. And so just the destroyed state of British people's bodies at the time. When I drive around America, and I just see random people and the obesity that has taken them over, or I think of the Road to Wagon Pier, and I think of the people's bodies are in a state of destruction across much of America with obesity. And so I'm going to address the obesity and the smartphone and all the depression, social isolation things. I don't remember what the other things were, like cytolytic. I don't know what that is. So, but yeah, so I think that misuse of cell phone / social media technology, smartphones and social media, has led to widespread unhappiness and depression. And if I could return the world to the technology of 2009, would I? That's a good question. I know I wouldn't return the world to the technology of 1909 because that sucked. And I wouldn't return the world to the technology of 1989 because that was okay, but kind of sucked. I can't actually remember it very well. But and you guys probably can't remember it at all. But would I return the world to the technology of 2009 before smartphones and social media took over everything? Maybe. And so I don't think the technological progress is linear, monotonic, blanket across the board, or even necessarily all that easy to define. My techno-optimism is more general. I trust societies to eventually, on balance, make the right decisions with the technologies they get. So it's that's really the root of the techno-optimism there. But I have many problems with the way specific technologies have been used, and I think that we haven't yet solved this problem of smartphones making us smartphones with social media making us socially isolated and depressed. And that what Chad was saying earlier is right, in that we didn't evolve to have a million people talking to us all at once. We evolved for small groups of peers, right? And it feels so good to just be in a room with a bunch of people who aren't using their phones, just hanging out. It feels so good because that's what we evolved for.
Yeah, around the campfire. Yeah.
Yeah, but this whole thing where there's just like I say anything on Twitter and like a random Nazi and/or random commie, which nowadays you can't even tell apart, scream at me about it.
Yeah, and the furry. They're also a furry.
And the furries. I don't know. I don't know. Furries.
Yeah.
I like furries, but maybe from a distance.
Yeah, and by the way, the anxiolytics are a class of medications used to prevent or treat anxiety symptoms or disorders. They're sometimes called anti-anxiety. Why don't they just use that? Anti-anxiety medications or minor tranquilizers. So there we go. But what you said right now, Noah, about the... kind of, yeah, I guess. But what you said about the smartphones, though, when it comes to getting to the crux of your disagreement here with Chad, I think it may have to do with, and again, not putting words in your mouth, but it may have to do with the smartphone being used responsibly is something that you may see human beings not capable at all of doing. You are not going to be as optimistic as Noah is. You would say that it's beyond humans unless they just destroy technology to do anything about this.
Well, before we go on,
yes.
I just want to say that I think Chad and I will probably agree on the negative effects that smartphones plus social media have had. And also obesity, we could talk about that too, not too different a thing there. But I think that where we may disagree is where we go from here. But anyway, back to Chad.
I mean, there's an enormous amount to be said here. You could talk about smartphones and social media's effect on people's productivity in pretty basic temporal terms. If you log into social media like Twitter, okay, while you're at work, it'll take about 30 minutes for your mind to fully regain concentration on what you had been working on. And we know, of course, people are constantly doing that, when they're on the clock, right? So a lot of productivity has been lost because we can assume that people never actually get to that 30 minutes to fully regain concentration. Maybe this is why every movie out of Hollywood now is a remake. People literally cannot regain enough concentration to come up with any original ideas. The best they can do is to maybe make the 10th sequel to a film franchise that started 20-something years ago. And I think this has a lot to do with it. And so we have the numerical problem, the temporal problem, which is easily measured of how much productivity is lost in that sense. But also if we add all of this time up, I remember seeing a meme, ironically, on Facebook when I was still using that before I quit, warning us on the platform itself that if you simply spent the same amount of time reading books as the average American, I guess, in 2015 was spending on Facebook, you could read 200 books in a year. And that might sound like hyperbole, but when I was working my last job in America before leaving at a truck stop, I told that to a lady working there, and she said, yeah, that's true. I did that when I was in prison. Yeah. When I was in prison, didn't have a smartphone, didn't have internet. I had time to read 200 books from the prison library per year. So we can quantify how much productivity has been lost by smartphones, but we have to maybe get the deeper reason why. And I think this comes back down to the problem I mentioned a little earlier, that the way a technological change is perceived by humans and the way it is perceived by technology itself, there's always a very problematic contrast between the two, because the way that humans will perceive certain technological changes in accord with their hardwired instincts is that they'll be hardwired to pay attention because it seems to be giving them something they desire on a very raw, instinctual level. We brought up fast food earlier as a great example of this. You're hardwired to pay attention to super sweet stuff.
The Skinner box, right? You press the button, give me the zap.
Right, but even that's a great example. I was actually thinking of that myself. The funny thing about that, the experiment with rats for having to walk over like an electrified floor to get a reward. The interesting thing about that is a rat under experimental conditions will not walk over an electrified floor all the way to the other side of the cage for food. It's hardwired to want food, but not that bad. There's simply too much pain. However, they implanted something like a direct dopamine stimulator in the rat's brain in one experiment. And the same rat that would not walk over an electrified floor for food would still endure the pain to walk over an electrified floor to get a shot of dopamine. Context free. It just wanted the dopamine. Okay. And that's kind of the situation we're in with social media. It gives you this dopamine hit for reasons, I think, going back to hardwired instincts related to social interaction that have to do specifically with an alleged 6 biochemicals that are released with each Facebook like. It was alleged that the researchers at Facebook headquarters actually broke down the biochemistry of receiving likes down to certain 6 biochemicals which were released, which I would assume are the same ones that would be released if you were to, for example, walk down to the grocery store and run into an old acquaintance, an old friend, and have a nice chat with them a little bit. You'd leave with that little nice dopamine rush because it's naturally selected to have those sort of community ties built up. It's a survival mechanism. We're hardwired to want it. And we feel like we're getting that when we're on social media. All these people are liking my posts, but I don't believe it's exactly the same. I think that it's kind of like drinking soda pop and thinking you're getting a big catch of sweet berries in the wild. It feels kind of the same, but it's actually degrading those natural instincts. You see this with porn, quite frankly, as providing the illusion that my hardwired instinct to want to find not just women, but a lot of women, because mammals are hardwired to want to have that sort of diversity of reproduction. In a way that's historically unprecedented. Porn provides the illusion of so many more women than you could ever imagine. The average young man today has seen more nude women than any one of his ancestors going back to the Stone Age, even if he's never been with a woman. And this is something which seems to be giving us what we want, but it's actually destroying the instinct to the point that the average young man today, to put it in very blunt terms, maybe not the average, but many young men today, even in the presence of a woman that he likes. The problem isn't that he doesn't like her. He's attracted to her, but he's been so rewired by this technology that he either needs Cialis, a direct pharmaceutical input to help him perform, even though he wants to, he can't. Or on the other hand, in order to get aroused, he needs that same archive of millions of different videos. So you see, we have this a technology which seems to be responding to that instinct, but actually degrades it to the point that it no longer works anymore. And I think all of the things brought up in this super chat really come down to that distinction.
I think that's absolutely right. I think porn overconsumption is a big problem. And I think in general, there's lots of overconsumption sort of things that, digital technology has allowed us to overconsume, quasi-sexual stimulation through porn. It's, food, the fast food network or whatever has allowed us to overconsume food. And then the social media has allowed us to overconsume sort of quasi-social, parasocial, relationships that seem to substitute for real friendship, when people mash the retweet button or, whatever, but aren't the real thing. And you're right. I think that those technologies have exploited our instincts. They have hacked our instincts to get us to behave in unhealthy ways. And if you're looking at the reason why technology evolves, it is not very difficult to microfound the dominance of these technologies in terms of individual choice, because individuals will choose to just look at a bunch of porn or eat another cheeseburger. Like, these are some of the most individual choice-based technologies that exist, and yet it's not good.
Well, not only that, though, but do you agree that through that process, the individual loses their chance at making a lot of different choices when they just get addicted? Yeah, there we go. So that is the crux, I think, of the problem here when it comes to you guys, because, Noah, you are still, I don't know, are you still an optimist? Are you still a tech optimist? Okay, so you're still a tech optimist after this. So the question for me would be, what exactly could people do to get us out of this particular situation? Because if it keeps going that way, I don't see things being that great even before the robots end up taking us over. I don't know, like, how would you say we can revert this ship back?
Well, okay, so I'm not so scared about the robots, because I think that if they're really super intelligent, they'll spend most of their time sitting around and just chilling out, because that's what that's what I'd do if I were smart.
Yeah, like the Buddha, those paintings of the Buddha just like meditating. Yeah, exactly.
But okay, so what do we do about the Skinner boxes? What do we do about the overconsumption technologies and things like that? Well, one thing we can do is do the more technology approach, which is just, you ate too much food, everybody's fat, you invent Ozempic. Now you take this drug, and now with this wonder drug, you don't want to eat anymore. So now you don't. And now you're a healthy weight. And so now everybody's on Ozempic. I think it's driving the entire economy of Denmark. Because it's a desire modification tool. So desire modification technologies are the future. We've been trying to invent desire modification technologies for millennia. Meditation is certainly one, which I'm into meditation. I don't know if you enjoy that. Definitely. But it's a desire modification technique, or gijutsu, or whatever you want to call it. But it's, Ozempic will modify your desires as well. And so, that's one way to address some of these things. I call this the not out but through approach. You just, technology gives you a problem, invent some more technology, and that's like.
Well, before we get to Ozempic, what about social media? Is there an Ozempic for social media?
Oh God, I hope so. Just a vaccine again. Maybe we can make mRNA vaccines against fucking bullshit. We'll see. I think there probably is with porn. I think there probably is a thing that will make people not overconsume.
Okay, are we?
As for social media is a little more complex, so I can't think, because it's not as simple a desire as just like jerking off or like eating or whatever people do. It's a very base desire, right? But then social media is a higher complex one, so I can't off the top of my head think of what it would take to get people to not like having the retweet button mashed, but still have normal social interaction. I'm not sure, but I think that technologies to modify sexual desire, almost no one is thinking about this, and yet it's going to be incredibly important and fundamental to the human experience within the next few decades. And it's the thing that everyone's sleeping on. You mentioned Cialis. Cialis is an important technology because before the 1990s, there was no term senile erectile dysfunction, except perhaps in the musty halls of academia. Right, but it wasn't a disease anyone talked about, because that was just, you're old, you can't get it up. Like, that's what happens. You're old. And then when someone accidentally actually discovered Viagra, which was the first of those drugs, when someone accidentally discovered that this worked, suddenly we defined it as a problem worth solving. Otherwise, people just sucked it up. People were just like, God grant me the serenity to affect the things I cannot change. And you have guys like, right? You have guys like who's the what was it, Catullus? I don't remember. It was a Roman poet who was writing like, my little bird has flown away, which means I can't get it up because I'm old. And so but then now old people can get it up. You just pop a pill, and now you're old, you can get it up. So great. And so technology solved this thing that was just not even defined as a problem, because it was so fundamental to the human condition. It was a limitation we didn't even think about refusing to accept, because there was no choice. There was no way to get it up as an old person. You just could not. There was no option to do that. And then Viagra came, and Bob Dole did those commercials, and then suddenly there was an option to do it. And not everybody does it. I mean, lots of people don't pop Viagra. You don't have to. No one makes you. But I think our society did a good job with that one. We did a bad job with some of these things, but we did a good job with Viagra, because now if you want to get it up as an old person, now you can. And that's cool. That was never true before. And so anyway.
Unless you did a lot of tantra, but that's a whole other thing. I'm sure there are some yogis out there. No, you don't think so?
Tantra, I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, because it's mostly mechanical, it's mostly about blood flow. So I think if you exercise a lot and you get really healthy, you can mitigate it somewhat. But eventually it will come take you. Like benign prostate hyperplasia, there was never a cure for benign prostate hyperplasia. But the point being that, and there's lots of things that are not curable now that will be curable in the future, like baldness. No one can cure baldness, except with drugs that fuck you up. They're not very good. In the future, we'll just be able to boop, done, not bald. If you don't want to be, or you could be bald, because lots of people look good bald, like Captain Picard or Shaquille O'Neal. But many people do not look good bald, and so they don't want to be bald, or they don't want to be bald for other reasons, and so you don't have to be bald if you don't want to. That will come. That will happen. And so those are some of the most optimistic cases. The bad cases, the cases where we fucked up with technology, sometimes there's technological solutions to technological problems. Sometimes, right? I mean, you could view solar power and batteries as that. If you view industrial society as inevitably destroying the world via climate change, unless we invent this other clean energy stuff that then makes us not destroy the world. Well, yay, we created a problem for ourselves with technology, and then we solved it. But at the end, we're richer than we were before overall.
Nuclear power.
Nuclear power. Nuclear. Fusion power. Nuclear. And so I mean, like there's all kinds of things we can do for energy. That's one option, but I think there's another option too, which is modifying society to accommodate a new technology, so that there's lots of new technologies that are like cars, right? Cars still have tons of downsides. I don't like cars, but they have enough of an upside that if you try to take people's cars away, they will revolt in any country. And people love cars that much. And cars at the beginning were insanely unsafe. Even as recently as the 60s, kids just got mowed down like crazy on the street. Like the number of kids were killed on the street was like 10 times what it is now. It was nuts, even in the 60s. And that was much safer than like the 1910s. But we implemented all like seatbelt laws and traffic lights and a lot of things, some of which are frankly annoying. I mean, do you like to put on a seatbelt? It's kind of lame. Who wants to put on a seatbelt? But drunk driving. I just want to get drunk and jump in a car. And go, woo-hoo! But am I allowed to say that on YouTube? Anyway, I don't really want to drive drunk. But when I was a kid, maybe I would have had I been allowed to. The point being that we implemented a bunch of rules that made the technology of cars a lot safer. They still kill 40,000 Americans a year, but it's a heck of a lot safer than they used to be, especially for kids. And society adapted. We modified. So that's the second possible solution that doesn't involve somehow getting rid of the technology, which I don't think practically we're going to be able to do. Technologies generally cannot be put back in the box, and even instead we'll either invent new technologies on top of that to try to solve the problems we created for ourselves, or we'll modify our society so to preserve some of the good effects and eliminate some of the bad. And I think that we will do the same with social media, smartphones, and I think we will do the same with cheap mass-produced food, and I think we will do the same with porn, maybe. I don't know, maybe people just like porn too much. But I think, I don't know, I'm Ace. I don't need porn. You go crazy. But I think that we won't always solve all these problems, right? I can't say, I'm such an optimist to think we're going to solve every problem with one of these two methods I've described. No, sometimes problems will go unsolved for a very long time, maybe forever. I'm not sure, agnostic about that. But I think that overall, on balance, stuff gets better because I like in general, I can't think of many times when the world for humans got worse over a 50-year period, where you could look at 50 years later, wow, the world sucks more now thanks to new technology. I can't really think of a period where you'd want to return. I can think of aspects where you might look at the way things used to be and say, well, you know what? Actually, we did it right before, and we should go back. We should do things another way. We should, there's failed experiments. There's stuff that doesn't work out. We toss it. But overall, I just don't see many examples of history where stuff appears to have gotten like overall worse from the march of technology.
Quick question. No, a quick question before Chad. How do you define good? Like, what for you means good in life?
Oh, just in my personal opinion.
No,
I'm
but
talking about Noah Smith's personal opinion.
No, but
like,
Noah
I understand
Smith's...
there's some people who would rather be a hunter-gatherer. Who, I understand there's the guys in Fight Club who would rather pound corn on the old destroyed highway or whatever they did, make their own soap from liposuction fat. Anyway, there's those people. That's technology too, by the way. There's people who would like that, and you know what? More power to them, whatever, I guess. But I don't want to. Like, I can't. When I say good, I mean good in Noah Smith's personal opinion, according to my Humean moral sentiments.
Interesting. Well, Chad, go ahead. I'm curious also what you think, Chad, about the Zepic and what that's going to create later on. So go for it.
A reference was made to a quote-unquote desire-modifying technology, if I remember correctly, as the solution to these technologies which are problematic because they give us too directly what we're hardwired to desire. But I would argue we've already reached that point, and that's precisely the problem. If we look at porn as a very, obvious example of this, we find that the problem with porn is that it seems to give you the most direct path to have exactly what you desire, even on the most private, unadmittable, and unconscious level. You see this with the rise of deepfakes a few years ago being mentioned in the news as a problem where now any celebrity could have a video emerge of them which is indistinguishable from the real thing, even though they simply superimposed video footage of their face into some already existing porn video. And if you look at the news reporting on this topic, you'll find that the stats themselves allegedly show that one of the most common targets of deepfaking is actually Emma Watson, who is Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, which shows, I think, that a lot of people have been given the ability, they think, to create their most unconscious fantasy, dating all the way back to the time that they were very young.
Potter.
Very young and reading Harry Potter. They had these unconscious thoughts implanted, these fantasies about Hermione Granger of all people, and now they have the
banging
technology.
Hermione Granger.
Apparently, Hermione Granger. Another
That's
one.
Fine. That's I'm sorry, Emma Watson. Your face has to go on some porns, but you know what? You wanna fantasize about Hermione Granger? That's fine. She's smart. She's an independent woman. She can do magic. Like, why not? I guess she is underage in the movies.
All right. Once you get to the later books, actually I haven't read, but eventually she gets over 18 years old.
There you go.
That's
over
this is a safely
legal age Hermione Granger. Whatever you want, go for it. Also, she's not real. I mean, Emma Watson's a real person, but Hermione Granger ain't real.
But you can make it real now. The technology has advanced to the point with deepfaking that you can make these manufactured fantasies real, even if you do so on a purely private level. You won't admit in public that this is the unconscious fantasy, which has been in the deepest recesses of your mind for years, dating all the way back to the time that you were, a preteen reading Harry Potter for the first time. But you've been given the ability by technology to make your most unconscious fantasy real, which would seem to be the most direct path to realizing your desires. The problem with porn, though, is we know that it is already a desire-modifying technology because those who use it too much, because of the tendency for it to specifically reward the instinctual desire for novelty, the problem eventually gets to the point where what's really novel enough to keep that stimulated is things that actually don't line up with your own orientation on a very fundamental level. One of the questions which is submitted to people like J.K. Imezi or Gary Wilson talking about this is, why is it that you eventually reach the point where you need she-male content, even if you identify personally as 100% heterosexual? And this just shows that desire seems to be given free rein to realize itself as it always had been, when in reality, the desire itself is being modified to the point that you don't really have any freedom or any choice at a certain point anymore.
Right. When I say desire modification technology, I mean technologies that allow you to purposefully, intentionally modify your desires how you want to, instead of doing something that you feel like you want to do that accidentally modifies your desires in ways you hadn't planned. So that's what I mean. I mean intentional desire modification. Think more like meditation than she-male, whatever.
Or,
is that connected to the Hermione thing?
Or,
do they give Hermione a schlong?
I'm sure they do. Or
somebody's tried it.
Or in Ozempic, because
weird.
Ozempic is something that mitigates your desire to eat more. So
Yes.
Chad, what do you think about that example that Noah brought up of Ozempic or other technologies that would be used, let's say, for pornography or other such things?
Any technology which is meant to address the problems of a previous technology will generate problems of its own, which will in turn require another technology to address those.
Well, can we see that in a realistic example here? So let's take
Maybe they're much
Ozempic.
smaller problems though.
Yeah, well, let's take Ozempic, for example. So, Chad, I don't know how much you know about Ozempic, but what possible, let's say, downsides would you give to something that if somebody takes it and they used to eat a lot and now all of a sudden they don't want to eat that much anymore and they end up losing weight? So, assuming, let's say, we forget about any side effects, let's say there are no side effects, just for the sake of conversation. There are no side effects, you take this magical pill, and now all of a sudden you don't, eat like a big fat hog. What happens after that? What are the negative ramifications of a technology of that sort?
Even if a technological change seems on the ground level to give some tangible human benefit, it was mentioned earlier that you have far fewer people actually dying of starvation, even in the so-called third world, today than you did in previous generations when there was a really big problem. Admittedly, that's the case, but the reason for that huge increase in agricultural yields was not that technology had a moralistic desire to keep people from dying or to keep people fed. It was rather that expanding the industrial agricultural practices into what had formerly been territories where traditional farmers worked, it was that competition between the two which motivated technology to expand into those areas, leading to nominally larger agricultural yields, indirectly leading to more people being fed and fewer people dying of starvation. But the reason why it happened wasn't the human benefit, even if in some sense a human benefit can be recognized, it can be identified on the ground level. And so too, if there's a treatment which in the short term keeps people from binging on junk food, it will be selected for some technological benefit to the whole system, even if it incidentally overlaps with some identifiable benefit to the human person.
I mean, I think ultimately the reason why new agriculture technologies that produce more food were adopted was that people want to eat. It was a human desire. It was like, oh, we didn't adopt those technologies because so that more people would be fed. Well, yeah, we did. I mean, like, it wasn't because the farmer had an altruistic desire to see more people fed. It was because people personally, selfishly want to eat, so they would pay more for the food. And the farmers were like, I could sell this food to people because they would like to eat and not die. And and so then they used the nitrate fertilizer and they made the food so that people could, not because they had any altruistic desire to see people eat, but because people selfishly wanted to eat.
Chad, do you agree, disagree? I mean, that's pretty understandable right there. I'm just trying to find out how this connects
Everyone wants to eat.
Yeah, but I just want to find out how this connects with Ozempic and a technology that would be used to take care of our desires, because that's really where I'm trying to focus here. Personally, what I would see happening here, I would just use the example of psychedelic drugs, for instance. I know a lot of people like getting their mind expanded by taking, LSD or mushrooms or things like that, but for me, it goes back to another, let's say, more primordial question, and this gets a little bit metaphysical here, but it gets to the question of why are we here? What is the task that we have as far as what we have to do, what we have to overcome? And if it's simply a matter of taking something that solves any of our problems having to do with willpower, it almost seems like that's cheating. It almost seems like by doing that, we are not necessarily living the kind of life where we test ourselves in the best way. I don't know, Chad, if you would agree that that's the primary issue. We can get into that a little bit later. But let's say other than that, what would you say would be your main issue with taking something like Ozempic that would stop you from eating more than you would have otherwise?
Well, if we address the reason why the agricultural yields increased, according to Jacques Ellul, is giving us a clue about how this works in general. He noted that, yes, obviously there is a tangible benefit to having more people fed and fewer people die of starvation, but the deeper reason why those agricultural hinterlands had to be reformed, modernized, really, was sociological in nature. Traditionally, peasants within, say, Europe were the most difficult people to influence with propaganda, the most difficult people to influence with, say, advertisements. Even to the present day, there are villages in rural India, not too far from where I live, where many people don't have electricity. So if they don't have television, they're not going to be influenced by either the advertisement for consumer products or the political propaganda, whatever. Not saying that there is any in my country, in America. They won't be influenced by political propaganda on the television or the smartphone and all these things. So because peasants were on a psychological level less easy to influence with technologies of, say, propaganda, the incentive was to modernize the agricultural hinterlands and basically, at least within America, displace a lot of people, of these people who formerly had been doing farming, into the city in some sense of the term. A lot of farmers simply went bankrupt as a result of modernization, the huge costs associated with it, and which some 90% of all farmers in America don't actually make a profit, at least according to a stat from, say, 10 years ago. So the enormous cost of modern agriculture is something which can only really be met by concentrating agriculture itself into these huge industrial organizations, which really survive off of subsidies from the US government and from other sort of corporate ways of raising money, which the local village farmer in the older days didn't have access to. So the modernization of the agricultural hinterlands also served the purpose of concentrating the power that had before been disseminated among a bunch of different farmers into these corporate entities. But the deeper reason why it was favored was, once again, just that it makes people easier to over-socialize. And I would assume that being put on any sort of medication, which you become dependent on, will serve the same purpose. If you become dependent on a pharmaceutical drug on a daily basis, you're going to be influenceable in many ways because of your need, if nothing else, to maintain the kind of conformity, to have the kind of job where you'll have insurance cover those medical expenses, which restricts inherently what you'll be able to express. You have to maintain a niche within society as a certain kind of employee, right, to be able to maintain access to those drugs, which in reality means that you won't be able to be publicly critical of any technological change.
And just to be clear, by the way, it does say you'll need to stay on Ozempic to keep the weight loss effects going.
Maybe. That's not entirely clear yet because we haven't had it long enough to know that.
Well, that's what I read over here. It says, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like that is another issue when it comes to any of these technological drugs, where if it becomes a prescription plan, then it's going to be beneficial for the companies to keep people hooked on things, as opposed to figuring out a way for, you as a sovereign person not to rely on having to take, this like yearly whatever it happens to be. And it's very funny because in dealing with certain things that I'm not going to mention right now for the sake of the algorithm, I noticed a funny thing that a lot of the doctors who I spoke to, not one of them mentioned anything at all having to do with vitamins, having to do with working out, having to do with any other things that you can do as far as diet goes. Not one. And when you think about it, it wouldn't mean excluding the thing that people were promoting. It would mean, hey, let's do both. Let's do this thing and let's do that thing. But that was not the case. A lot of these doctors didn't even know about these various things having to do with vitamins. And when you would think about it, it's like, why wouldn't they know? Why wouldn't they know things about diet? Why wouldn't doctors know things that have to do with the kind of food that people eat on a daily basis, or other ways to make sure that people don't get sick in the first place? And I think it is because people have become very segmented into their particular niche, where you go to the university, you learn the specific things that you have to learn, and then that's kind of it. Then you just go along with the program. So I know, Chad, if you would agree with me that that's the other thing that I'm kind of concerned about with this whole thing, having to do with whether it's Ozempic, whether it's any other kind of drug, we may lose our independence in being able to figure out better long-term ways of dealing with a problem if the people who stand to make money from a very particular thing, it will put that in our advertising, will put that in our face, and wouldn't give us any choice to seek out other things unless we're just naturally curious in the first place. And that's kind of that's a big problem that I'm seeing. I don't know what you think about that.
Medical advances, if I may say very quickly, I'm sorry, the medical advances negate choice to the point now that in some states you can't even give medical advice on your personal blog or YouTube channel without having a medical license, because it will be interpreted as practicing medicine without a license. People have actually served jail time for something as basic as that.
Whoa.
That's pretty stupid. Look, we've used laws to restrict the way in which a technology can be used for human benefit, and the laws were bad. A blog is a cool technology enabled by a vast substrate of very complex internet technologies. And now we could use that to give medical advice to people half a world away. And then the law says, no, you can't use that technology because we said that this would be practicing medicine and we can't have you do that. So no. Society restricted the technology in a way that was probably counterproductive.
But would you say it also restricted that technology from a more, let's say, not superior technology, but a technology that's superior, in the money sense, being able to create certain laws for its own benefit? So
I don't understand the question.
So if people are making money from one kind of medication, and
Right.
that means that other people, who aren't exposed to alternatives only end up stuck with this one medication, that's a problem, because that's a problem when it comes to politics, where these companies can now buy lobbyists who can, lobby in Washington for, their side and against any alternatives. And that's kind of, for me personally, for Lev, that's Lev's issue when it comes to what Chad is talking about with this rise of technology, like Ozempic or like any of these other medications, that it does limit the choice of the person when there's too much money behind a particular medication.
I certainly don't disagree with that. But then, can you point back to a time before such and such was invented and say, well, at that point, things were better?
Well, I would say never better, because obviously now if you go on the internet, you can learn about all kinds of things that I'm sure many scientists back in the day would have been, starving to get. Everybody wants to get at LibGen. If they would have been, living in one of these, medieval communities, they'd be like the medicine man, and all of a sudden, hey, you can get like all this information about science, technology at your fingertips. The problem, though, is that for most people, they're not going to be that curious. They're just going to play Candy Crush Saga on their phone all day, and otherwise they're just going to do whatever it is that they're told. And that's the issue for the overall body politic here, because the overall
Can we get Candy Crush porn is the question.
It's already done, I'm sure. Like there's
I'm
Rule
sure
30,
it's done.
there's Rule 34 of Candy Crush.
People and anyway, I don't
Exactly. No, but no, like you get my point, right? Like most people are not going to be that curious. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree that our techno reality is far inferior to the techno utopia that I can imagine in my mind. But when I look back at the past, I'm saying, like, tell me tell me the number of the year that you would like to reset society to and live in that.
I would like to reset to...
Or not even live in it. Not even live in
Yeah.
it personally. Tell me the year that you would like to reset society to, and let's think about that year.
Okay,
That's my challenge.
Okay, I'll answer the challenge. Like 20,000 years ago, back when Atlantis still existed, because then people had psychic powers. That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Before Atlantis went bad. Yeah.
Is it possible to use deepfake technology to get Destiny with Lev's head on him instead? Can I turn Destiny to Lev? And that's what is this possible to use that technology?
Oh,
Anyway.
Destiny's got to come on BTR. Destiny, if you're listening to
fake.
this, come on
Stream
BTR
fakes.
right now. Right now. How dare you not come on
I did
BTR
show
yet?
it. I did Destiny, Vaush, and Bastiat.
Oh,
And then,
man. Yeah.
the only one I didn't do was Hassan, who said like 20 times he wanted to do it and then just never followed through because he has the memory of a gnat. But
Well, this is the other thing, by the way. Like, you're seeing how the far left is reacting right now to things that are going on, and people like Hassan are pushing very particular narratives here. And these are not people who are very curious, in my opinion. These are people who want to be within their... Not little, it's a big bubble. It's a really big bubble of all of these Zoomers that see Hassan and identify with what the guy is talking about, even though, in my personal opinion, what he is talking about, isn't worth my pinky nail over here. But that aside, when we're talking about this influence of things that, as somebody whose parents are from... Well, I was born in the USSR back in the day, and whose parents, lived through all that thing, and to have this guy, Hassan Piker, talking about things that people back then, living under those kind of conditions, would have immediately just started laughing at the guy's face for, mentioning. The fact that we have Zoomers today that are attracted to those ideas, and we're seeing it playing out in real time with the anti-Semitism and all that stuff, to me that signals a very deep lack of curiosity within most of society. And if that society is going to be our quote-unquote body politic, then they're going to be the ones that are also going to be, let's say, voting in the AOCs of the world into positions of power. And then when you combine that with technologies that are going to, numb us to whatever experiences we would have to have in life in order to grow as a person, these are the things, I'm not against what you're saying, Noah. I am also a tech optimist in the sense that I believe that it doesn't take a lot of people to figure out how we can go through this, but we just have to be aware of the specific hurdles in the way. And I think that there may be too much people, let's say, who are not as receptive to speaking with people like Chad Haag, which is why I'm incredibly happy, Noah, that you are here today and speaking with him. Because, Chad and a lot of people who are, let's say, from Chad's circle of thought, it's very rare that they would combine, even with somebody like Bastiat, for instance. And I've had Bastiat on the show, nice guy, but it is a very separate circle. It's like you were working at The Atlantic, you were working from Bloomberg, and Chad's world is completely different from that. And from the experience that we've had today, Noah, what do you think that differentiation is? Because I think you guys agree on a lot. I think Chad has offered maybe certain things that are either new or certain things that you haven't really considered that much. But what do you think is this issue that at least I'm noticing with these separate spheres of influence, these separate social spheres?
Well, I think that this goes back to the problem of anxiety and depression that we were talking about resulting from social media and smartphones. I think that most of this crazy stuff is just a desire to belong. For example, incels, those guys, incels. So when some incel shot up something in Canada, I went and I took a day and I just read incel content. And I was like, wow, these guys, what these guys actually want. There's a few predators in that community who just want to prey on psychically vulnerable people. Actually, more than a few. But what these people want is not a girlfriend or sex or whatever they sort of imagine or pretend that they want. They want male bonding. They want friends. That's why they're there. They're bonding. It's just when guys will get together, normal people who aren't incels will get together and talk and be just like complain about women. 21-year-old guys will get together and complain about girls, and the 21-year-old girls will get together and complain about guys. And yeah, there's always complaints to be had, and legitimate complaints, but mostly what they're doing is they're bonding, they're becoming friends. And that's what the incel people are reaching for, are trying to do. They're trying to bond with friends online by talking about how much women suck. They're reaching for male friendships. And the technologies they're using to do this online are not sufficient. They're not good enough to provide them with what they need in the way of friendship. And so they're having to say these incredibly extreme things in an effort to overcome the thinness of the medium that they are speaking through. Because when you get together with your friends in a room and drink a beer or go, shoot cans out on a farm. I mean, I'm Texan, I've done that. When you do that, it was a horse ranch and it was bottled. But when you do this, we evolved for that. It's a rich medium of in-person interaction where we can bond and have friendships that are very satisfying. The attenuation of the medium of social media means that you get only friendliness instead of friendship. And you get the illusion you get some of the little pieces of social interaction fed you through this tiny thin funnel, but you don't get the real rich, full thing that we evolved to need. And what are we going to do about that? Well, we can use social solutions to reduce social media consumption. And I think that in practice is what we're going to do a lot of. We're going to say, no screen time for you, kid, or things like that, or rules in society where you got to put down your phone or whatever during dinner or something. We're going to have a lot of things like that. And, but I also think those things will be someday amenable to technological solutions where we'll be able to, because some of these incel guys, barring the thin attenuated medium of technology, they would have no medium at all. They'd be hikikomori. They'd be stuck in their little house, just jerking off to porn for the rest of their lives and never talk to anybody. And now they talk to people and it's kind of toxic, yes, but it's maybe it's very toxic. Maybe it's worse than talking to nobody would be. But I think in the future we'll get something better than that. And we're really, digital technology moves fast, but I remember it. I remember existing in a time before the World Wide Web. I lived before the World Wide Web, and I remember vaguely, slightly, remember what it was like. I existed in a time before smartphones. And I'm not that old. These things are new. It's been a very short time, and it seems like a very long time that these things have been around because so many things happened and so many current things came and went, and so many topics were discussed and argued about, and so many streams were streamed. So it seems like it's been a very long time that these things have been around, but they've only been around a very short time. And if you look back in history and you look at some of the things we think are the most benign technologies today, like newspapers. When's the last time you felt threatened by something someone wrote in a newspaper? But for people in the French Revolution were reading some shitty printed broadsheet and stabbing their neighbors over it, and that era lasted arguably for centuries. And so digital technologies have not been around for very long. The ubiquity of porn that you're discussing has been around for 20 years with broadband? I don't remember.
Well, since the Usenet days, I'd argue that would be okay,
yeah. I wasn't looking at okay. But the point is that it hasn't been very long that we've had this massive porn access, and we've had this sort of crappy social interaction of social media, and that we've had these things. The anxiety and depression bubble began in 2012, 1 decade ago. And we can say, oh my God, everything sucks. It's ruined the world. And maybe you want to go back to before that. Maybe. But give us a little time to work this out and see how this thing works.
Well, Chad, do you think that the little time would be something that, could work? Would you be able to steelman what Noah was just talking about? Maybe we would be able to get this right. But another thing that I would also be curious to ask you also before we would get to super chats as we're going through this is, what do you think about the interaction that, let's say, the incels or however, the 4chan people have with, let's say, the community of Noah Smith, which is also different than the community of, let's say, Hassan Piker, for instance. Because like Noah, like you write for very prestigious publications, Bloomberg, Atlantic, things of that nature. And one of the goals for me with Break the Rules is to try and converge these separate spheres of influence when it comes to people who are more from the mainstream and people who are more from like the very online space. And Chad, even though you're very offline as far as your personal life goes, living in southern India, you're also very online in the sense that you are around a lot of these very curious people who want to find out all of this esoteric knowledge and philosophy, and get really, really deep into the nitty-gritty. And some of them, I'm not saying all of them at all, but like some of them would be sort of like in a hikikomori type lifestyle like Noah was talking about. And the way that they would see people who would be more from a Noah circle, I'm very curious like how you would personally define that kind of relationship. But you could take that first, or you can go with whatever you would want. So Chad, you got the floor, buddy.
The question of the kind of community which is admittedly made possible by the internet, I think is a paradoxical one, because on the one hand, you can use this opportunity for discussion to talk about all the problems with this opportunity for discussion. And I still routinely get comments saying, well, why is he talking about Ted Kaczynski's manifesto with a PowerPoint presentation on a YouTube video? Why are you even on YouTube if you're actually against this stuff? And I think that that's playing into the paradox is, yes, we are at the point in history in which what we're doing right now is the place where you have to have that discussion because it's the only place where it can take place. If you look at the alternatives, even for Kaczynski, he attempted to write a book under a pseudonym about the same sort of things he brought up in Industrial Society and Its Future. And I believe, although I'm a little less clear about this point of his biography, I think he got it published in a very small publication level, but obviously it made no impact whatsoever. He had to go to, at that time, the mass communication megaphone of the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc., to get this document out there. And you could argue he had to get people's attention in a way which, if you consider the alleged means by which it was done, obviously less than ideal. But the point really of having to make use of the kind of spaces of communication which are available, even if they seem to contradict the philosophy you're trying to promote, I think is even more noticeable today when we're using internet. And the funny thing about that for me is that you can only do that. You can only establish as much of a community for really serious discussion as we have on YouTube, in which I would argue it's even more meaningful. It's not just an imitation of what goes on in academia. It's more meaningful, I would argue, because within academia, we know the problems of journal articles that nobody reads, even to the point that one study found some 70% of journal articles in academic publications had actually just had their bibliographies copied and pasted from others. They didn't even read their own sources because they figured nobody's going to be scanning the bibliography. And even when this happened, it was a robot doing it as part of a study. So we have, I think, not just an imitation of what would ideally go on with academia, we're actually doing the only thing that would be the way to do this today. And that happens on YouTube. But the irony of it is you can only do that if you actually distance yourself as much as possible from the influences of technology. I live without a smartphone. I live without constant Wi-Fi connection. I have to get a hotspot from my wife's smartphone to log into the internet, which is not even on a daily basis. But that's exactly what allows me to have the kind of sustained concentration to think about these technological problems to the point that I'll then be able to discuss it when I do log in. It's the same with making use of the information. You mentioned earlier that there's a huge amount of information online available for free, but the technology of the internet itself makes it virtually impossible to use it. You have to actually download those materials from archive.org or whatever, and then read them when you're offline. That's the only way I, for example, over the past 6 months was able to read 5 books on the Sumerian language, a few books on the Babylonian language, a few books on Sanskrit. I could not have had the sustained concentration to read about these dead languages, very difficult dead languages from thousands of years ago, if I had been connected. It just would not have been possible. So that's the kind of paradox we find, in which the internet, yes, does allow a certain opportunity for community to form, but it can only really happen on a meaningful level if you also distance yourself from communication, from the internet, as much as possible. And the alternative to that is a situation in which you have the kind of lemmings who would just follow after. You mentioned Hassan Piker, a guy who is condemning the 1% while living in a $1.5 million mansion paid for by the naivety of his followers.
Yes. I'm laughing at Hassan. Sorry, I'm not laughing at what you're saying. It was classic.
Chad,
well,
yeah,
the only way to not be that person, the only way to not be a lemming who follows after the most conformist, even while appearing to not be conformist, the most over-socializing stuff, really not even coming from Piker, but from the technological system itself. All of the causes that he is championing are simply reiterations of things that would be useful for the technological system itself. The dissolution of national borders, the acceptance of 68 genders. All of these things are requirements for modern technology to progress. If you have the illusion of 68 genders in the short term, that's just another way of saying that people can no longer fall back on their pre-given biological sex as an excuse for why they can't do what technology requires of them at the moment. In the ancient worldview, that was still possible. It was understood in Antigone, for example, that Creon has to follow one sort of law because he's a man, denying the burial for the war criminal, but Antigone has to follow the other law, which mandates her to give the burial to her brother because she's a woman. There's two different laws within the play Antigone, and that's totally unacceptable to modern technology. You can't be predisposed to act in only one certain way because of your gender. And that's what the 68 genders that someone like Piker is espousing, that's what it really is just a means to an end to make a genderless society in which everyone will be exactly the same. So too with dissolving national borders. You can't have culture as something that can prevent you from acting in a certain way. And all of this, once again, is something that his followers will accept so readily, so unthinkingly, just because it makes sense to them, because they're already so over-socialized by modern technology that they can't think in any way except what the technology has induced them to do.
Noah, any thoughts on that?
It is easy to apply the term technology to outcomes in the modern world because we do everything we do with technology. So it's easy to look at the things that happen, to look at someone who makes up some silly social theory or starts some stupid movement that we don't like. It's easy to look at that and say, that is technology. This is to satisfy the demands of technology because we are all using technology. It's easy to, but that's actual causality is much harder to disentangle there. And the idea that, do you know a guy named Eldridge Cleaver? Do you know that guy? You ever heard of him? Eldridge Cleaver began life as a serial rapist, turned into a hippie cult leader in the 60s, where he would have hippie cults full of these young white kids who would just listen to whatever bullshit that he made up so that he could have sex with them and to make them do stuff. Then he became one of the Black Panthers and pushed out the original founders of the Black Panthers to become the Black Panther leader. And then he gave that all up and became, I shit you not, a Reagan Republican and became a big Reagan supporter. Eldridge Cleaver was a bad guy and was a crazy guy. But, he was doing this kind of stuff, and he wasn't alone. There were lots of people throughout society doing this. Maybe they didn't have the amplification of technology, but they were just as crazy as any of the people.
Marilyn Manson. Charles Manson, not Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson was that's bad enough, without even getting to Charles. I think the point is that there was lots of that. Jonestown, those guys.
Yeah, Jim Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, the Branch Davidians, this weird cult, they eventually got in trouble. I think they got in a fight with the FBI, and Anyway, the point is that there was never any barrier to crazy shit. We just didn't hear about it. We just didn't hear about as many of the crazy things because the availability heuristic wasn't there. So maybe technology is breaking our brains, not necessarily by creating more craziness, but simply by notifying us of the craziness that is already out there via the availability heuristic of social media. And I wouldn't be surprised. But I do have to go fairly soon, so I think we should get to whatever we have to do.
Let us get to the super chats then.
But wait, no.
Yes.
I have one more statement.
All right.
Which is that I have a pet rabbit here. He's in the other room. His name is Constable Giggles. He's a very sweet guy. He likes to lick my pants and he likes to chew sticks, and he's very sweet and cuddly. And he's disabled. He has one leg that he drags because he messed up his back. Hopefully we'll be able to rehab him. I don't know. But in the wild, he'd just be a hamburger, instant hamburger. And not only that, like, he's 7 years old. Rabbits live to 10 to 13 years basically in captivity. But then in the wild, I think their average lifespan is 1 to 1.5. Because they're just nature's hamburger, and nature just spams more copies of rabbits, like more rabbits. Most of them will die, but then just get out there. But then like this one rabbit, this single rabbit, I really want to keep alive. I really like him, and I want to keep him alive. I want him to have a good life, and he has such a good life because of technology. Technology has upended the brutal hierarchy of nature that would have turned him into an instant hamburger. And I decree that he shall not be a hamburger. Nature will be denied. He will not be a hamburger, and the power of technology will mean that he has a long, happy life full of nice things to chew and pets and treats, etc. And to me, that's not negotiable. That's not a negotiable part of the world. I'm not going to just give up this little guy to the hamburger because someone out there is jacking off too much Hermione porn. Right? I'm not gonna let my rabbit die just to stop someone from jacking off the Hermione. All right, now I'm done.
Wow. No, but now I do want to agree with you here, Noah, that not specifically rabbits, but other beings, let's say, that are in my life, that I value the fact that technology was able to help them and save them and have them thrive in this world, and so I don't have the problem with that at all. When it comes to, healing people. My problem just has to do with making sure that we've got enough free will, whatever you assume that means, not to be hampered by technology, so that every decision we make has to be like in a smaller and smaller room of choices here, as we were talking about earlier. But anyway, we're going to get to the super chats. Only other thing that I was curious from Chad is, if you can, Chad, real quick, before I get to the first super chat over here, can you say, when it comes to people like yourself and people who are, let's say, not as smart as you, but more like the nodes, like the 4chan people who take certain ideas that you have and, send them out to other people. How would you...
4chan?
Yeah, the nodes of 4chan, exactly. How would you... Yeah, the mimetic wizards. How would you say, or what would you say about the very different world that, let's say, Noah is in or was in when it comes to Bloomberg, when it comes to Atlantic, like that particular world, and what would you say are going to be the dynamics happening between these two worlds, which I'm desperately, through Break the Rules, trying to bring together?
The world of anti-technological thought is something which absolutely has to be practiced outside of the big institutions of power. The kinds of publishing houses, even, which are willing to engage in this, tend to be very small operations, including there's a publisher in Greece who's currently translating one of my books, but is operating really off of the radar. They're a very small operation, printing the text, physically disseminating them throughout the nation of Greece, off the radar. I don't think they have a website. That's kind of how you have to operate if you're willing to engage in this, because once you get into those big institutions, okay, which are connected, however subtly, to the kinds of sources of funding, which, say, the universities are, right? Your ability to speak is so restricted as to basically make it to the point, if I may say so, my experience in academia, to where you have to be reiterating what the technological system is demanding in one form or another, which is why most PhD students that I remember dealing with when I was in graduate school were more interested in maintaining their Twitter account than they were in writing their dissertation. And their Twitter account was mostly retweets of people like AOC and these other Democrat Party politicians. Even if you want to be an intellectual professionally, you're really just reiterating not just what these figures, but what the technological system itself has been saying. You can only really speak freely, I think, if you're so far off that radar that you're basically, I think, at this point, only logging into the online world occasionally and otherwise existing outside of that influence.
And I don't.
Or you're me.
Yeah.
I'm different.
No, you are different because you're here. That's the whole
I
point.
don't think I've retweeted AOC at all. I kind of like her. She's,
Yeah. No, but the fact, Noah, that you were able to reach out, and I think, I do believe sort of in destiny. The fact that you were able to reach out, come on Break the Rules, speak with Chad Haag over here, that says a lot. That says that you are somebody who is willing to step outside of whatever, let's say, zone of friendship that you were in before and try and, see what's crack-a-lacking over here. And I am deeply appreciative of that.
You guys are the least weird people I've talked to this week.
Oh,
I don't know.
that means a lot. Let's get to the super chats over here.
Let's do super chat.
All right, Eric Hager, $10. Evolution, including adaptation and technic relations, doesn't affect entire species simultaneously, but affects subset on the outskirts of species, which carries on while main group is unable to propagate. Guess that was a comment as opposed to a question. Any thoughts before we move on to the next one here?
I love the hell out of that. I don't know what that meant at all. That was great. I want more of that.
Well,
Please
you're
start
in
a
luck.
blog.
You're in luck because Eric has one more here for $5. Quote, tech creating neo-caste system between those who can handle 24/7 porn on tap and those who are laid low by it. No, that's what I'm imagining too. There's going to be like all these gooners like in their goon cave who are going to be like in a pod like goon cave. They're going to be hooked up to a machine. They're going to get their life force extracted, 24/7 while they're just going to watch all these images of like this hentai harem going on, like, characters from all the Gundam series and Fooly Cooly, whose avatar you're using on Twitter. There we go. They're probably going to have like...
It. I was against it before. Now I support it. I switched.
Yeah, but they're going to, they have all of their life force drained, but then you're going to have the elites at the top who are like, like Steve Jobs didn't let his kids have an iPad, allegedly. Like they're people who know that all this stuff is dangerous, so they are going to take really good care of making sure that their kids don't wind up getting stuck, in this weird Elsa Gate hellscape. I mean, you've heard of Elsa Gate, right? Like all these YouTube videos of, these nursery rhymes with a lot of this horrible imagery in them. Even though the horrible imagery, you could say, was cleaned up by Google HQ, what they still have, if you like give your kid an iPad and just like show them like a fairy tale, like nursery rhyme, eventually they're going to get to a video with really horrible colors, like, very primary, ultra bright colors that aren't good, for a kid's sense of color design. It's like the digital equivalent of candy, you could say. And this is why I think that a lot of those kids that are exposed early on to these very simplistic things, they're going to end up being screwed up. But anyway, next super chat here, Neuroda 999.
I'm looking up Elsa Gate here. This is amazing.
Boy. Wait, is this the first time you've ever heard of Elsa Gate?
Yeah, I never looked at Elsa Gate before.
All right, you are in for a treat. I'll send you an article that I wrote. I'll send you an article that I wrote about Elsa Gate in my Substack, which, by the way, is levslens.com. Everybody subscribe to my Substack right now. And I wrote a new article, Uniting Against the Anti-Western Front, unmasking alliances between leftism and radical Islam empowered by China in the quest for Western unity. So be sure to check that one out. But I also wrote a one about Elsa Gate early on, so be sure to check that one out as well. Anyway, back to and it's called Elsa Gate for President. Here's a link to it, by the way, guys. Anyway, back to the super chats. Neuroda 999. I work in healthcare. Antibiotic resistance is a huge issue. It necessitates new drugs, which paradoxically makes the enemy more resilient. How is this type of technological progress sustainable? Guys, what do you think?
I don't know,
It's
but
not.
before
Put
penicillin,
it
you
very
died of a
briefly, and a
paper
huge
cut.
percentage.
Whoa. Wait, one at a time. Wait, Noah first, and
A
then
huge
Chad.
percentage of
Chad first.
Okay, Chad
A
first.
huge percentage.
I'll just be very brief. A huge percentage of UK residents are already fully antibiotic resistant. This isn't hypothetically off decades in the future. A huge percentage of people already are.
Well, it's mostly pathogens that become antibiotic resistant, not people, right? I mean, antibiotics don't really act on people; they act on pathogens.
Well, I might have used the wrong word, but the point is that they've been overexposed to antibiotics already through overprescription.
Yeah, antibiotic resistance is a problem.
It is. Well, final super chat of the day here. Brent Bernhoft, I can pronounce that, I'm not German. $5. Does Chad embrace the thoughts of Ted Kaczynski?
Unequivocally embrace. I was asked after Ted Kaczynski died, I was on a live stream and somebody said, "What are your disagreements?" I said, none. I don't think I can think of any. Well, I mean, with the philosophy, we're not talking about the man's actions, but the philosophy, the rationalized description of technology, can't think of anything that I disagree with. I might supplement it a little bit with the thought of John Michael Greer or somebody like that, but I don't disagree with what he said specifically about technology.
And what would you say, just for my sake here, what would you say from our conversation with Noah is the main disagreement still, in your opinion, Chad, between you and Noah? Like, where would you say the big issue here is, if you can, like, pinpoint it?
I remember taking a look at Noah's article before the live stream today, mentioning something along the lines of the technology and humanism are very closely interlinked. Would you say that's kind of a fair way to describe it? Technology and humanism go hand in hand. Is that correct?
No, I have faith in humans to do the right thing with the powers that they're given.
But the problem, from my perspective, with that description is that humanism, at least in the Nietzschean sense, man is the only measure of values. There's not these pre-given a priori eternal, like Platonist values, which are beyond, that we're held accountable to insofar as there's values. They're
Agreed.
Products of humans willing them into existence. I think that might have been truer at, say, the time that someone like Immanuel Kant was writing, and it was still possible for humans to exercise the kind of really creative work that you saw with, say, art or philosophy, etc. It's not really true anymore, precisely because all of those really creative impulses in which man really creates new values out of nowhere, those are all of the things which technology has been naturally selecting against. And even people who are professional thinkers, literally within Hollywood, can't have any original ideas. All they can do is either create the 10th sequel to a franchise started decades ago, or they can remake, in the most almost like intentionally trying to sour your memories of it, a classic film like the Snow White film upcoming with Rachel Zegler. It's almost like they're trying to take everything that actually worked in the first production and simply negate it, almost just to get the lulz, almost trying to just troll the audience into provoking them into anger. And that's something which I think maybe it's just a very cynical front that they put over their complete inability to think. So even if you look at the best examples of humanism in the sense of people willing their own values into existence, at the forefront of that being art and philosophy, well, they both kind of disappeared. At this point, philosophy departments in the West are basically just cheerleaders for physicalism. The idea, well, we don't have any answers, but those guys down the hall working on string theory, talk to those guys. They have all the answers, because we philosophers simply admit we don't know anything.
You've been reading Liam Bright. As you should. Liam Bright's good.
Whatever it is that they're doing, it's not philosophy at that point.
Why do we ever have philosophy departments? Why do we ever apply the institutional machinery of industrial chemistry labs?
They should live in the barrel. They should live in the barrel like Diogenes. That's what I think. You know, they should. Barrel, yeah. With the dogs, they shouldn't be in some fancy. Yeah.
I mean, like, why do we try to have like publisher perish mass, like basically take the entire institutional machinery developed for chemistry, to produce massive amounts of incremental chemistry innovation and apply it to philosophy department? Like, why do we decide that, or English, why do we decide that like that was the format for every single university department and we're just going to make them all interchangeable? You know, I don't know why we did. That was stupid. But yeah, you know, like the path to wisdom, well, it's plain and simple to express, to err and err and err again, but less and less and less. That is my meliorist philosophy.
Well said. So with that, guys, we are going to conclude this wonderful broadcast. The only other question that I possibly have as a lead-in to, and I would love for both of you guys to come back. Noah, this is your first time. What'd you think of BTR? Would you like to come back?
That was great. Yeah, it was fun.
Excellent. And just to lead into a possible subject for another stream, Noah, would you say that you are spiritual or more physical when it comes to what you think is beyond this mortal coil?
I mean, well, spiritual is more fun.
Good answer. All right. And with that, let us do the plugs. Noah, what are you working on? Where can people find you? All that good stuff. Go for it.
I'm working on thinking about industrial policy these days mainly. Although I'm also thinking about lots of other stuff. I took sort of a 2-week break to yell at idiots who said stupid things about war in Israel. But you know, those things happen. So I'm thinking about industrial policy, like what comes after laissez-faire economics. Many people have proposed ideas, but I think we're starting to get an idea of what it actually will be. So, and come to my blog. It's called No Opinion, no O in the middle, just No Opinion.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. I didn't figure that out until you just said that. No opinion.
You thought there was an O in the middle?
No, I didn't realize the pun of no opinion.
Oh, yeah, it's a pun. It was that, or like, you know, I was gonna call it No Apparent Reason, but that was too long. Anyway,
I love it.
Happy to come back. I can bring. I can find some more crazy people to bring on. Yeah, absolutely
Excellent.
crazy people. Like I can find some crazy technologists to bring on if you want.
I love
AI
that.
People. Oh,
Well,
I can bring the EAC guys.
EAC. Wait, what is EAC? I keep hearing EAC.
Chad, do you know EAC?
No, what is EAC?
Do you know the extropians from the 90s? These guys who were just like, we're going to be jellyfish on other planets. Yeah. You know, just like more accelerate the technology. And these guys are back and they're called E/AC, which stands for effective accelerationism.
Ah, yeah.
They're technological accelerationists, which is, you know, a joke on the old concept of accelerationism. Anyway, you get it or you don't. But anyway, they're very fun. They're very silly. I could bring an EAC person next time.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. And Chad, I would love for you to come back as well. And Chad, what do you have cooking in the old South Indian curry kitchen there? Wait, does South India have curry, or like what would be this? I know dosas are a big South Indian specialty, right?
Yeah, within Malayalam, it's pronounced dosha, although most of South India, it's dosa.
Yeah, I love them. I don't know if you've ever had like some good dosas, but I love the ones with the cheese inside. It's like these big things of bread that they bring out. It like takes up the entire table, and they got like these dipping sauces that you could just like dip them into. It's really good. All right.
It's also incredibly cheap. Within Kerala, you can get it for about 50 cents.
Wow, not bad. All right, Chad, what are you working on, brother, before we conclude? And where can people find you?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I greatly enjoyed this discussion. Right now, in the School of Forbidden Text YouTube channel, we're doing a series on mecha, anime, and anti-tech philosophy, in which, surprisingly, I don't simply dismiss all of the representations of technology within Japanese anime as just falling into, the sort of things Kaczynski would critique, although there's room for that too. What you find within mecha animes we're exploring right now is a very strange compromise between tradition and modernity, which is less possible within the West because of how that's viewed within Japanese culture. So that's going on. We're also going deep into the Kaczynski Papers archive to examine a number of super rare unpublished texts, such as letters, essays, etc., So it's a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to continuing with both of these discussions.
Nice. And Noah, are you also a fan of mech anime, just for the record?
I've been known to watch a robot or two.
There we go. All right, so be sure to check his stuff out. I've been watching it today, part 2, talking about Mobile Suit Gundam. It's really good stuff. Anyway, guys, be sure to follow me at Lev Po on Twitter, and also Discord for all the Chad heads out there and for all the Noah heads out there. If you guys have Discord, which I'm sure some of you do, go to the Break the Rules Discord server right now. I'm posting the link in the chat. It's a lot of fun. We would love to have you. And also patreon.com/breaktherules. Listen, you guys need to support this show for this whole thing to keep going. So when you become a patron, you're going to get a lot of good stuff. $20 patrons get VIP access to future live events. Like, especially like if you live in the New York City area, I'm going to be throwing live events. You guys are all welcome to come. I'll get to introduce you guys to like really big, important, influential people. Noah, the last stream that Break the Rules had, I had Vladislav Davidson, who is a fellow of the Atlantic Council, speaking to Jason Risa-Jorjani, who was part of like the Iranian resistance to their current leadership structure there. And so Break the Rules has like the combination of like these, kind of eccentric, very out there sort of events, along with events that are very much focused on today's politics, what's going on, and having actual like movers and shakers in the think tanks meeting with people who are more within the online atmosphere. Because I think that this is a combination that desperately needs to happen. And it's happening right here on Break the Rules, but only with your support. So patreon.com/breaktherules. And lastly, but not least, levslens.com, or you can go to levpo.substack.com. I'm writing a Substack. It's really good. I'm not just saying that because I wrote it. It's really, really good. Check it out. And this new one about the current thing going on with Israel and Russia and Iran and all that, that one has an audio version as well. So if you guys don't want to read, you can listen to it. That's how good I am to you people. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Next time I will see you, we are going to have a great episode coming out. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be with the return of Actual Justice Warrior, by the way, if you guys remember him from back a couple of, like a year ago. And it's called Solving Crime, and it's with Actual Justice Warrior and Glenn E. Martin, who is a entrepreneur and criminal justice reform advocate. So, we have Actual Justice Warrior, who is like pro-police, and Glennie Martin, who is more anti-police. So it's sure to be a very interesting discussion. Anyway, guys, take care.